It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us here today. I'm Shaun Haney with RealAgriculture and host of RealAg Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Canadian grain farmers compete every day in a global marketplace, but when it comes to information, we're not competing on a level playing field, to be honest with you. Farmers in the U.S. and the European Union, they've got access to timely, transparent export sales data. Now, in Canada, that information simply, well, it's not available. And that puts producers at a real disadvantage. Today's discussion is about why that matters and why it needs to change. This work, led by Sask Crops and APAS, looks at the supply chain impact of export sales data transparency and the opportunity that it creates. Independent analysis suggests that closing this information gap could generate up to $56.6 million annually for Canadian grain farmers, even using conservative assumptions. But this isn't just about marketing grain. Better export sales data improves demand forecasting, logistics planning, and overall supply chain efficiency. It makes Canada's grain system more resilient and strengthens our reputation as a reliable trading partner in volatile grain markets. Volatile being the understatement. As Canada looks to grow and diversify exports, we need to think beyond physical infrastructure. Information is infrastructure. I'll repeat that. Information is infrastructure. That's why Sask Crops and APAS are calling for a federal export sales reporting program to give Canadian farmers the data they need to compete and succeed. Today, we're going to be joined by three guests. Well, we're four. I'll get to the fourth here in a second. Marlene Borsch of Mercantile Consulting Venture is an agricultural economist and grain market expert with more than 4 decades of experience in Canada's grain sector, including senior roles in grain trading and export. She's a co-founder of Mercantile Consulting Venture, where she provides market analysis and strategic advice to agribusinesses, farm organizations, and governments in Canada and internationally, and also one of the co-authors of the report we're going to talk about here today. Secondly, Mark Hemis is president at Quorum Corporation. He is team leader. Mark has an extensive background in the area of grain transportation. During his 23 years with the rail industry, he had held a variety of senior positions in the field of marketing and transportation, is well versed in the wider issues faced in improving competitiveness in Canada. And thirdly, Jim McCormick. He is Chief Operating Officer at agmarket.net. Jim brings over 30 years of experience as a registered commodity representative and market strategist working with grain and livestock producers on hedging and trading strategies. He holds a bachelor's degree in agribusiness management from Purdue, and his analysis and commentary on agriculture markets are regularly featured across industry platforms, including RealAgriculture. We love to have him always as a guest. But before we get into our panel guests, I want to invite Jeremy Welter into the webinar to talk about why this topic is important to farmers. Jeremy's the VP of APAS and director from District 6. He was raised on a family farm near Caribert, Saskatchewan. He is a fourth-generation farmer, a father, and a small business owner. Jeremy, how are we doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Shaun.
Yeah, thanks for making some time to be here.
You bet.
Okay, Jeremy, off the top here. As a farmer, why do you feel having something like export sales reports, how would that make a difference to you? Why is it important?
So, it's important because I think you said it best, Shaun. Information is infrastructure. You could probably take the front tires off of your vehicle, pop it into reverse, and I think you'd be really surprised at how far the vehicle actually makes it without those front tires. Now, that doesn't mean your vehicle is complete, and right now the infrastructure lacking in the Canadian grain marketing system is that information. We like to think that we live in a free market society, but the asymmetrical nature of grain marketing is such that, farmers and the industry at large doesn't have access to the same type and amount of data that some of our international competitors have. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage, both from an on-farm perspective of actually making informed and timely decisions, but it also puts us at a disadvantage for our grain logistics, getting our grain to market. If we don't know what's going on, if the railways don't know what's happening, it makes actually transporting the grain from our country terminal storage system out to the port, loading it on boats and getting it to the customers that want Canadian products. It just creates a lot more challenges, and it makes it far more difficult for us to be really viewed as a reliable supplier on the world stage.
Yeah, appreciate your perspective there. So now, in talking to different farmers and industry groups here in the past month about this topic, I would say some producers ask whether, they kind of maybe a little bit skeptical, and does transparency actually show up in better basis, or is it just more data to look at? From your perspective, what's your thoughts? Who, in terms of these farmers that are skeptical, do you actually think from your perspective this would improve your bottom line?
Yeah, I do. The results from the study found that following large export sales announcements, there were definite improvements in the basis level going even 1, 2, 3 weeks out. Modeling suggests that a timely and accurate sales reporting does capture a portion of that basis signal. That basis signal is a market signal. In a lot of ways, it does indicate on the demand side whether or not the grain companies are looking for product. And so by improving the transparency of that data and making it more available to every player in the larger environment, there's very, very strong indication that will provide positive influence on that basis.
Yeah, and before we wrap up here and move on to members of the panel, Jeremy, one of the things that's stuck out to me here on this topic is what I alluded to, the U.S. and Europe having this kind of info, right? And so it's not like Canada. Sometimes Canada makes some policy decisions where we're out on an island. It's like, who gave us this crazy idea, which can be a negative. In this case, we're really playing catch up, which kind of should be a little bit of a signal to us.
I agree 100%. It's something that we talk about quite frequently at APAS and certainly at Sask Crops as well. Canadian producers are competing with producers in other jurisdictions. So when we are lacking a tool that they've long had, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. The reality is that for the vast majority of companies that operate in Canada in the grain handling industry, they also operate in other jurisdictions. They're operating elevators and export terminals in the U.S. or in Europe.
Yeah,
they already have to report that data. Really, the only detriment currently is to the Canadian farmers that we don't have a similar reporting system.
Yeah, and this isn't an isolated thing. This isn't the only example in the beef business. We don't have Canadian box beef prices. We have to rely on U.S. data and extrapolate them, bring that back to Canada and assume it's running in parallel. And maybe it is and maybe it's not, but we are kind of assuming that. So, hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us here today, and have yourself a Merry Christmas, okay?
Thank you very much. You as well.
We're going to take a quick break, but we've got more of our webinar discussing, does Canada need weekly export sales reports? You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Sask Crops and APAS.
Lindsay Smith here, host of Agronomic Mondays on RealAg Radio, and of course the Agronomists, 8 p.m. Eastern, every Monday. No, not during the holidays. Wishing you and yours a very Merry Christmas and a happy holidays. I hope that you have an amazing time getting together with all the people that matter. Just remember, the gifts are just the icing on the cake. The real important thing is the food, and the food you share with your family, and of course the twinkly lights. That's really what's important. In our family, we always decorate gingerbread and hang them on our very real tree because it makes for an excellent Christmas morning snack. So you may borrow that one if you would like. I hope you take the time this season to drive around your neighborhood, check out those holiday lights, the holiday sparkle, maybe do some good. I highly recommend volunteering at perhaps somewhere that needs some help, or maybe you can donate some of those much needed pantry products to a family in need. Stay safe, everyone, and have a very Merry Christmas.
When we're looking for news and stories that need reporting here on Real Ag, it usually starts with something that's unexpected, different, unforeseen, not what we predicted. As we celebrate Christmas and the holiday season, that's really what we're celebrating, whether we're reflecting on the birth of Jesus or making memories, spending time with those most important to us. Here's to good news in more ways than one, to encountering the unexpected, learning something new. Thanks for joining us here on RealAg Radio. Merry Christmas.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Today we are replaying a webinar that we had last week, sponsored by Sask Crops and APAS, discussing whether or not Canada needs weekly export sales reports similar to other regions around the world. Let's continue the conversation. Okay, let's bring in one of the co-authors of the report. It is Marlene Borsch. Bringing Marlene in here. Marlene, how are we doing?
I'm excellent. Thanks very much.
It's great to chat with you. Okay, so at a high level, what problem was this study trying to solve for Canadian grain farmers, and why does export sales data sit at the center of this problem?
I actually would, if I may, go back a couple of years, because we did a first study in 21 for APAS and 5 commissions, I believe it was as well, identifying the data that's missing in Canada, actually. And that first report, by the way, I think is still available on the APAS and Sask website. But it was important because we looked at a number of concepts on the quality of the existing data that we have, timeliness of data, the level of data, and there I mean current data versus historic data, and equal access to data. And it became very clear that, there are some major gaps. And what's worse, actually, over time, the level of data that we have and the amount of data that we have has actually deteriorated in terms of what's reported to the railroads and then published via the CGC data, some of the vessel loading data that we used to have until the wheat board went away, and so on. So at the time, there were resolutions at 5 commissions, I believe, in Saskatchewan, that there is room for improvement of data. And so that's where the first one came about. Once we had done that, we were asked to refine that and look at what is actually the economic impact. Is there any way to measure that, which is not an easy thing to do? And that's where basically to quantify the impact. So we did a simulation model. We used 17 years of data, basis and futures data. I think it was ranging from 2007 to 2023. Did a regression analysis and really tried to quantify what the actual effect is. And I should emphasize, because some people say the numbers look actually fairly modest, I should emphasize that we looked only at one factor, at adding some sales data to it, and we only looked at the basis. It doesn't even measure what that data would do for your cropping decisions, for example. And so it's as you said, it's actually a very modest estimate. And it very clearly showed that that we are, as farmers, leaving some money behind that could be brought back to the farm. And this is at a time when we all know that the price cost squeeze is actually getting more serious. I think it also goes back to some very fundamental issues. I think part of the reason for commissioning some of the studies is that we also, in the Grain Act review, and I hope I don't sweep too far, but it was an opportunity to see if we can refine some of that. Because there are some farmer-producer safeguards enmeshed in the Grain Act, actually does talk about data collection. And so the thought was, do we have data to actually push that along a little bit and try and fix the data gaps enmeshed in a renewed Grain Act, which obviously we still haven't done yet. And I think it goes back to the question, what do we really want to achieve with Canadian agriculture? And this is also trying to stay away from a partisan discussion, are there winners and losers? I think overall, what are we trying to achieve with the agri-food system? Are we trying to maximize exports and maximize overall GDP returns to the participants? Then very clearly in today's world, improved and additional data will give us responsiveness. It will give us the ability to make smarter and more timely marketing decisions, and it will also influence how we choose the production of the next crop. So these are some of the very basic things that were underlying that. So in that sense, it's a very big topic, and I like bringing it back to the higher ground because I think we have some decisions to make. If Canada really wants to be competitive, if we want to improve productivity, our never-ending discussion of productivity goes into that.
Yes.
And I'm coming more and more to the conclusion that since we haven't come up with the golden egg that will solve all our productivity problems, we better start working on many small improvements within the system, i.e. timeliness, better sales decisions, and harvesting some of that money in order to compete with some of our peers that already have some of this data. And seeing that we may have some restrictions to the United States, our biggest clients on many portfolios, we have to be working on our competitive structure and our productivity in order to do so and garner some of the other markets. So I think that's, in a very, very broad stroke, what's underlying the study and also underlying the discussion. Is it good to have data or not? Is basically the question. And could we quantify it, which we did in this one example. And by the way, within the study, the first third actually dealt with a literature review. An international literature review. We concentrated on all kinds of US studies, European studies, on some from Canada. And there were really, a number of takeaways which said that market transparency is actually key to have a smoothly functioning market, that there's a role and can be a role for government to make sure that this data shows up. I have to think here that there are beneficial economic effects to market transparency, that it represents value to producers, very importantly to the APAS discussion, and that indeed there are gaps in Canadian data. We over and over showed that in both of those studies.
Yeah, right now where we're, Canada and the U.S. are both following very closely what is or isn't going to China. You see those weekly sales reports when it comes to soybeans and how much is potentially going to China. We don't have that on Canadian canola from that aspect. So now, to be frank, this is not a discussion where everybody's all in on, yes, this is a no-brainer to do, Marlene, because I have heard from portions of the Real Agriculture audience that are concerned if this was to go forward. And the argument is that this would be like an anti-competitive sort of issue. There's only a few grain companies, large ones in the country, only 2 railways, and this would not be good for the competitive landscape. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't buy into that at all. I think there's always an informational advantage to be harvested. I traded grain for Cargill grain and for Excan grain when this still existed. Of course, it's very nice for traders to sometimes have a timing advantage. And that's, I think, what the discussion is about. That's why I was saying, if you look at the overall picture, are we going to be overall competitive? And are we working in a fairly level playing field? That discussion doesn't exist for me, actually. It's an understandable reaction. And that's why I said earlier, I don't want to go into partisan discussion. I want to go into a discussion, is it better for the system? Is it better for our level of exports? And is it going to flatten out the playing field a little bit? Because it's very clear that producers are not working under the same level of data availability as some of the grain companies are. So I would add to that the very same companies, almost all of the very same companies, they operate in other jurisdictions where that is not the case. So I think they would certainly be equipped to deal with it and to get used to having a more level playing field. So it's a trend. It might be a transition time, but I don't think that should be an argument that deflates the overall benefits of this.
Okay. The analysis suggests the estimated benefits here are conservative. What impacts or behaviors are kind of hardest to quantify, but likely add even more value if you were to add it to the headline number?
I think it's really the timing of sales. And keep in mind, we were talking about futures and basis, and I think it's about 24% of our acreage is already in cash crops that's not traded on futures markets. And I think basically the results for making more timely decisions and actually knowing what's going on with sales. For example, what we have now is very delayed export data. Export data only shows what has already happened in the past. The stuff we ship today from Vancouver was probably traded 3-4 months ago or in a wide band. It has nothing to do with the sales activity that's going on now. The only way to get a sense is really by the purchasing behavior by the companies. That's how we judge it now, or having actual data published of the major sales. So, I would say that today, all we have is very delayed StatScan data. And for example, at the moment, we haven't even seen October data yet, which, think about that. We are now well into the middle of December. So what does Christmas. That actually tell you? Yeah. And other than that, we have the Canadian Grain Commission handling data, which many people look at faithfully every week. But again, that's an execution data. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the market right now.
Want to encourage everybody to keep on piling in those the questions that you have. There is people that are doing that. Please continue to do so. Marlene is going to be here at the back end. We'll bring the whole panel back together and we'll get to some of those questions. So Marlene, thanks so much for this one-on-one session. We're going to take a quick break, but we've got more of our webinar discussing, does Canada need weekly export sales reports? You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Sask Crops and APAS.
This is Christiana from the head office in Lethbridge, Alberta, wishing you a very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas, and thank you for spending time with us in 2025.
This is Shaun Haney, host of RealAg Radio. From all of us at RealAgriculture, we want to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas. This time of year gives us a moment to pause after a long season filled with early mornings, hard work, big decisions, and plenty of uncertainty. Whether you're still getting chores done, keeping an eye on the markets, or finally slowing down to spend some time with family and friends, we hope the next few days bring some well-earned rest and perspective. We're grateful for the trust you place in RealAgriculture to be a part of your operation, your business decisions, and your daily conversations about farming and ranching across North America. From everyone at RealAgriculture, have a safe, peaceful, and joyful Christmas season. Thank you for being with us all this year, and we look forward to connecting with you again in the year ahead.
Bah, humbug! Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, host of Wheat Pete's Word and a regular on Agronomy Monday, and Scrooge in this year's Christmas Community Theatre production, saying it's the holiday season. Rest, recharge, reinvigorate, reconnect. Take the holiday time to spend time with family and friends. Thank you for all you do, and we'll see you in the new year.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Today we are replaying a webinar that we had last week, sponsored by Sask Crops and APAS, discussing whether or not Canada needs weekly export sales reports similar to other regions around the world. Let's continue the conversation. Next, let's bring in Mark Hemis. He is president at Quorum Corporation. And Mark's got a lot of experience in looking at proprietary data on the grain shipping portion of the industry and aggregating all of that and putting it together into a great I do not miss that weekly report that Mark puts out, and it really provides some insight on what's going on from a rail performance standpoint. So, Mark, from a grain transportation and supply chain perspective here, how does the lack of export sales reporting distort some of the signals today across the system, in your opinion?
You would like to think that the railways have the ability to look forward in that manner, but the way that they operate, I don't think that it would be really helpful. Not in the short term. If you want to turn anything around or make any changes in your operation at a railway, you have to know at least 6 to 8 months ahead. It's like a big ship. You don't turn it around really fast. So it would be interesting information, but I don't know that it would help much operationally. I do have a concern about. I kind of fall into the category of I'm a little bit reticent to open up this kind of confidential information. I think the amount that it would help farmers making market decisions would be offset by the fact that when you make this kind of information public, it also means that all those competitors in all of the other countries, as well as the buyers, have got all of this advanced information, and they would use that to leverage their own position. Mm-hmm. So I think that, if this was to move forward, you have to be really, really careful about how you aggregate the data in such fashion that you do not betray commercial confidences that would put Canada at a disadvantage, as opposed to providing that one advantage to the one stakeholder. Not disputing that it may help at some point in time. But then when you aggregate it, we are, in relative terms to the U.S., the U.S. is probably 2 to 3 times higher volume in what they export on an annual basis. Therefore, when they aggregate data to conceal some confidential information, which they do in their sales reporting, it doesn't have the same kind of effect as you would in a smaller market like what we have in Canada. And I have a concern there. That I think is something that should be taken under careful consideration in how data like that would be managed.
So is that true across all commodities, though? Like, you think about soybeans, heavily export reliant and heavily export reliant to one customer as well. So wouldn't that be comparable to the Canadian situation?
In some manner and effect, yeah, it would be. But when you take a commodity such as wheat, where we're exporting to 60 different countries or more, that could become problematic. It could become problematic with canola as well, because while China has been the major buyer in the past, right now we're marketing to a few dozen different countries in order to make up that difference. And that probably gives some people, if you were to tell them 3 months in advance as to what our inventory situation is going to be, it wouldn't be helpful to us. And you have to remember that, the U.S. model of sales reporting really wasn't intended to provide visibility. It was a national security issue because it came out of that whole the great grain robbery. The visibility part of it was a side benefit. And so we're kind of at odds with that. I don't think that the European model really is as open as what the U.S. model is. But again, the volume issue in the U.S. really gives them the advantage that they can aggregate it such that they protect most of that.
That's what I was going to ask you, Mark. Is there a way to aggregate it so it's not like 5 million metric tons of canola shipped to these, or exported to these 4 destinations? Is there a way to make it a little bit more aggregate in nature from a volume perspective, or does going kind of a middle ground there still not address some of your concerns?
And then at that point in time, at what level of aggregation do you get to where it's not helping anybody?
That's fair. That's a good question.
So all I'm saying is that there's a lot more thought that's got to be put into this before you ever get to the point where you want to actually, pull the trigger.
So in your opinion, because there's a few people in the Q&A that are, you got them stirred up, Mark.
No,
That's good. Okay, so
if it's not an open discussion, you're not
no,
making
absolutely
progress.
Yeah.
I would also point out that in what we do is in the grain monitoring program is pretty. We publish rail rates. We publish all of the tariffs that the grain companies put out. We do that on a monthly basis. We provide all of the movement information, both weekly, monthly, and annually. So to Marlene's point, yeah, that's after the fact. But it's a lot. What we put out is, the monthly report usually comes out within 14 days after the end of the month. We're just in the process of getting ready to publish the November numbers. So
yep.
I know that maybe people aren't as familiar with the data that we put out, but every month on our website, there's about a 246-page file that gets put up on our website that shows all of the data that we prepare, and it goes all the way back to 2001.
Right. So I guess some of the information that you're reporting on the rail performance,
and what's getting loaded to vessels.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. How is that different in the way it's presented than what export sales reports would be, and in tying it back to this competitiveness discussion?
First and foremost, it's after the fact. I mean, what Marlene's advocating is being able to see what's going to happen 3 months from now. Mm-hmm. In some cases, that would have value, but you have to be careful, because at the same time that you're giving it to the producers, you're also giving it to all our competitors and our buyers.
Okay. No, that is fair. I know I'm going to have some more questions from you as I go through all the Q&As. If you do have questions for Mark, highly encourage you to put them in that Q&A box, and we'll get to them when we bring everybody back together. Mark, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break, but we've got more of our webinar discussing, does Canada need weekly export sales reports? You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Sask Crops and APAS.
Hey everyone, Amber Bell here, field editor and host of Ruminating with RealAg. Just hopping on to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas. I know this season can feel a little bit like a rodeo. Whether you're finishing chores, running around to holiday events, or trying to remember where you stashed those presents you swore you wouldn't forget. But I hope you still get a moment to take it all in. For me, the best part of Christmas isn't the bustle. It's those rare, quiet moments that seem to settle over everything. You know the ones. The yard is still, the house has finally gone quiet, and the world feels like it's taking a deep breath. There's something grounding in that kind of silence, the kind that somehow says more than all the noise ever could. I hope you find a bit of that this year, however it shows up. I also want to say thanks for hanging out with us this year, listening, calling in, sharing your stories, or just letting us keep you company in the barn or the truck. It truly means a lot. So here's to a warm, joyful Christmas, to equipment that behaves reasonably well, and to soaking in the moments that matter, even the quiet ones. Merry Christmas, everyone. Can't wait to chat again soon.
Back to RealAg Radio. Today we are replaying a webinar that we had last week, sponsored by Sask Crops and APAS, discussing whether or not Canada needs weekly export sales reports similar to other regions around the world. Let's continue the conversation. Our third and final panelist is Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. Love talking to Jim about market outlook and everything that's going on. Today is a little bit different. Jim, are we up or down today in the market?
Oh, corn market was up a little bit before we started the recording. The beans and the wheat market were continuing to be a little bit under pressure.
Okay. Well, I said volatile at the beginning of this webinar, and like I said, maybe a bit of an understatement. This is a tough time for farmers to try to sort out what they need to be doing with their marketing on old crop and the 26 crop as well. But I appreciate you joining us here. I know you're busy. So for those that are less familiar, how do U.S. farmers and traders, how do they actually, from your experience, how do they actually use USDA export sales reports in their day-to-day marketing decisions?
Well, let me explain. We kind of get two different major reports. We get a report every Monday, inspections. That is grain that's actually been shipped out, okay, that's been previously sold and it's shipped out. We get that every Monday, Okay, Shaun. And then on Thursday morning, we get the export sales. Whenever a trading house sells over 100,000 bushels of corn, they have to come, or 100,000 bushels of any commodity, I should say. They've got to essentially let the government know that those bushels have been sold. And as the gentleman said, that is essentially because of what happened under the great grain robbery back in the 70s. So those are the two major reports we get. But we also get what's known as a flash sale. Okay. Right. Whenever someone makes a transaction overnight, and a good example is what's going on here recently. I'm sure the listeners can know about the trade deal that President Trump created with the Chinese president. Okay, the Chinese president came in there and said, "Hey, we're going to commit to buy 12 million metric tons of beans." So what the trade's been looking at recently is these flash sales. So when a trade deal gets done, like we mentioned at the beginning, you'll hear, "Hey, was there a deal done? We heard 3 more boats of beans were sold." What'll happen if those beans get sold today, then it'll get announced into the system. Then at 8 o'clock every morning, they'll be knowing what is known as a flash sale that the USDA will announce, saying that this sale has been done. So we get 2 normalized announcements, and then you get the flash sales is how we get our data. And the market uses that as a gauge of the price is overvalued or undervalued, to be quite simple.
Okay, so it does kind of create transparency. Mark was talking there about the competitive concerns, right? And so when you have a crop that is heavily export reliant, it's sort of, maybe a bit of a tell or a signal to other competitors or maybe even buyers that are out there. What is there? And he points out that that's a little bit that's the difference between Canada and the U.S. in this regard, because there's more domestic consumption in the U.S. What are your thoughts on that distinction?
Well, it is a tell. I mean, but it's also a gauge that's going to allow, the producer or the person, the owner of that product, what to do next. Okay, I would argue. Plain and simple, we rallied the bean market dramatically here on this China news. Yeah. Okay. But if you notice, we've been in a free fall here, the CBOT, for the last couple of weeks as the market essentially is coming down to earth. And the reason why it's coming down to earth is, if you notice, we're getting flash sales to China, Shaun, but we're not getting flash sales to anybody else in the world. In essence, we've outpriced ourselves to the world. So what you're looking for on these flash sales is if we start seeing flash sales to other countries, then we know we're getting to the point where the farmer's going, I know I'm getting competitively priced to the marketplace, and that'll help put a low in the market. The other way you got to look at it, if you're a producer here in the Midwest, and how our clients like to look at it, we have clients all across the country. Like you said, we deal with a lot of our commodities, especially corn and beans, we use domestically, but we still export quite a bit. Now let's put a producer here in Central Illinois. He could sell to essentially an ethanol plant, he could sell to a feed plant, or he could sell to the river market, okay? But what he's going to see, if you start seeing, I've got flash sales of beans going to China, corn going to Mexico, whatever it is, and I'm seeing these flash sales going, that's going to signal to my clients that, hey, there's going to be demand for that physical product. And what does that demand usually lead to? Now all of a sudden, I know the export market's competitive. He's got to compete with the ethanol buyer, potentially with the feed buyer, and that might give that basis push, and that's going to give that producer the knowledge that he can say, well, I can in essence go to the ethanol guy and see if I can get a better bid, because I can turn around and sell it to the export market per se. Yeah, so that's how a lot of producers use that knowledge.
Yeah, it sort of extends your knowledge in terms of where the grain goes past the farm gate, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And go ahead.
What we're looking at right now, just to kind of react what's going on in China. We've done a lot of China business, but unfortunately, a lot of the business is going out of the Gulf of Mexico. That's where the ships are being loaded and pushed out the Gulf instead of the P&W. What our clients are waiting for to find out a flash sale that says we sold X amount of tons of beans to China off the P&W. Because if I'm seeing sales off the P&W, that's going to tell my clients in the Dakotas, hey, you're probably going to see an improvement in basis, because if it's going off the P&W, that more than likely that grain is going to be railed from North Dakota out west, and that signals to that producer in that portion of our country that, hey, maybe I've got at least that sale is going to generate maybe some physical demand for my product, in essence, give me a better price.
Well, one of the things I find interesting is that during the record long government shutdown, that was experienced this fall, one of the things that didn't happen was the weekly sales reports. And I heard a lot of people, even some of the some of the analysts we talk to on a regular basis who can be a little bit, anti-USDA reporting, even they were like, okay, I kind of miss these reports. We miss them. We don't really know what's going on. Obviously now the government's back and things are back on stream. But I guess from a U.S. perspective, what did you learn during that blackout period during the government shutdown when it comes to this topic?
Well, knowledge is power. And if you don't have that knowledge, it's hard to make decisions on what you're going to do marketing grain for our clients. There was a lot of, with this deal from President Trump, there was a lot of, hey, they're going to buy 12 million metric tons, but there was no confirmation of it. So the trade was looking for, you're just looking for that confirmation to make that next decision down the line. And you don't realize, like you said, a lot of people, the USDA, there's a lot of people that complain about the USDA, but I'll be honest, Shaun, it's a job I would not want. It's a very tough job. But when you get used to that data, you get used to the weekly export sales, you get used to the flash sales, you are essentially don't have that information to trade on. And that allows the market to do two things, either go very, very quiet or get very, very erratic due to the lack of knowledge. So, maybe events from the flash, from a tweet would normally not move the market as much. It will move it in exaggerated moves because of the lack of knowledge of the day-to-day knowledge flow that we normally trade on.
Yeah. If Canada was to adopt a similar reporting kind of framework, what lessons should policymakers in Canada learn from how the U.S. system evolved over time? Or is there, from your perspective, is there ways to improve the way that some of the reporting happens in the U.S. so we can learn from that too?
Well, some of it is the efficiency of how it's done. I would argue, if Canada's going to instrument it, if you're looking on a producer and, there's always rumors in the industry, plain and simple. We were talking before you started recording. There was a rumor where there are 3 cargoes of beans being bought. Yep. You hear that trickle through the cash system. We hear that from our cash guys. The one thing I would say to make it the most even playing field you can get is to try to make sure if a deal gets done, that it gets done to the knowledge. So it's not just the cash people are knowing about it, but everybody knows about it. So you want to try to make it as transparent and probably as quick a turnaround as possible would be my best recommendation. Yeah.
As somebody that's advising clients in the U.S., let's just say on a crop like wheat. Okay, you've got a customer in Montana or North Dakota. Okay, that's similar type of wheat that is being grown in the Western Canadian prairies. If there was export sales reports out of Canada, would that be would you use that? Like, how would you use that data in advising your own clients? Let's superimpose this concern that's out there in terms of like it gives a leg up to other people. How would you use it?
Well, I mean, how I would use it, plain and simple, is, you look at pricing, plain and simple. What's it cost to get a deal done? Essentially, plain and simple, is you're using the overall parameter. We are in a world market. Our U.S. wheat prices are terrible right now. Part of the reason why they're terrible right now is because Canada had a big crop. Australia had a big crop. Argentina had a big crop. So what we look at every day on the wire services is who's buying wheat from whom and at what price. So, how I would look at that knowledge from Canada is I found out if Canada sold wheat to Egypt, whatever it is, then you can find out, well, if Canada sold wheat to Egypt and we didn't, what does that tell me? Our wheat price is too high.
Yeah.
Type of situation. And that's how I would use it. It's just more in tune to, value. When it comes down to it, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to find a source of a product we produce, a source to sell that grain to, be it corn, be it wheat, be it beef, whatever it is. And if you don't know what the competition is selling it for, how do you know how to market your price efficiently and at a fair price? So the more knowledge you get across the spectrum, it'll make it a little bit more efficient, I believe.
We're going to take a quick break, but we've got more of our webinar discussing, does Canada need weekly export sales reports? You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Sask Crops and APAS. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. but nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazik Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Today we are replaying a webinar that we had last week, sponsored by Sask Crops and APAS, discussing whether or not Canada needs weekly export sales reports similar to other regions around the world. Let's continue the conversation. Let's bring everybody back in here. We got a flurry of questions. Well, we're bringing everybody back in here. I will say that Jake has a comment here. Knowledge is power. Well said, Jim. Oh, I lost it here. Farmers in Canada lack this information. This information is working in the U.S. It's time to bring it to Canada. Okay, we got everybody here. Marlene, you heard the discussion here from both Mark and Jim. What do you have some thoughts to kind of follow up on what you just heard here?
No, I think it was very interesting to hear this from an American side who has the system, and it's very clear, how it's being used from a producer's point of view, and that it helps them gauge as to what to do next. It helps to gauge as to what the product flow is, what the demand is, and if the demand is coming to your country or not. I found it very interesting to hear that, the piece of information that you're uncompetitive, which tells you might have to be storing longer, waiting longer, or, what you expect in terms of the price trajectory is invaluable. Because in our system too, the biggest gains and losses to farmers are really in deciding the timing of sales, be it futures, be it in the cash market. And, so the idea that knowledge is power and allows you to make a much more refined decision, to me is simply it. I did not get the impression from the American side that they felt ill done by it. I would also add, when Mark was talking, and Mark and I have known each other for a long time and have a lot of respect to each other. But he was saying, well, the U.S. market is that much bigger. I think, the U.S. does something like 110 million tons of exports because they have a huge, big domestic market. I'm not quite sure if that number is exactly right, but something like it. Jim can probably correct it. But Canada easily exports 43, 45 million tons as well. So it's really a 1-to-2. And for us, the export markets are extremely determinant because we do not have the size of domestic markets. And so not having the signal as to what the sales flow is at any point in time cripples you in terms of knowing where the price trajectory is. I really firmly believe in that. So.
Mark, do you want to comment on that?
I would never be the person who said that more information is bad. I just think that you have to tread carefully in a situation like this because the potential to do it badly is a lot larger than I think the benefit would be derived from it. And I was looking at the Q&As as well, and John DePape raises a really good point, and it goes back to 1984 when we ran out of canola, which at that point in time, it becomes a national security issue as opposed to a visibility one. So somewhere in between, I think, is the right answer. But I don't know that we have the kind of volumes. We're pretty concentrated in our big movements. Our big movements are wheat and canola. When you get into some of the smaller trades, like, peas, lentils, etc., well, lentils is becoming a big one as we go forward, but you could be betraying more confidences than what the benefit that would be derived from it. So
what John? I'll read John's comment here, just so everyone's all in the loop. And it's good to see you, John. I haven't heard from you for a while. In 1984, we essentially ran out of canola because exporters did not know the total being sold. It was very disruptive to the market and costly to some, as well as detriment to our reputation amongst export customers when we had to cancel or defer sales. Sorry, Mark, but we should do whatever we can to avoid that again.
And I don't disagree.
Okay. Jim, there's a question here. I think it's from Ryan. I'm trying to find it here. There's been lots of talk about basis efficiency. Does it at all create futures efficiency? Is Ryan's question? Does it help in terms of the futures market landing on the price of I guess the minute or the day, Jim?
Well, yeah, it does. I think the futures price is will impact, and the futures will usually move faster than the basis. The basis in the U.S. tends to trade a little bit inverse of the futures in general. As the futures market goes down, in essence, as it's trying to drive prices low enough to do two things: either soften supply, trying to discourage people to produce something, or bring in demand. But like what you're seeing here, just a classic example right now, as this bean market has been selling off on the futures here, Shaun, recently, in certain locations in the Midwest, we're actually seeing the basis improve on the bean side of the equation and in the corn side of the equation. Not because of the demand for beans on the export market, but it's on the crush side, which has been very well. On the corn side, we're seeing the basis improve on the efficiency simply because the market is using that basis to try to pull grain out of the farmer's hands, because our corn sales are running at record pace. Our ethanol grind continues to run very strong as well. So they are both going to react. And if you notice, anybody who watches the futures market, if you get a surprise flash sale at 8 o'clock in the morning, Chicago time, when that flash sales comes out, you will see the market spike on the opening traditionally and gap higher at 8:30 when we do the reopening. So you will see the futures market react almost instantaneous with confirmation of a sell, or they might sell off with a confirmation of a cancellation, which we will get as well at times.
Yeah. There's a couple comments here from people that are in attendance here in the audience. Somebody commenting here, if the data can be used by international customers to squeeze Canada for better prices, then it will be counterproductive. Exporters can't pass through to farmers that which they cannot extract from the customer. It could end up hurting farmers on average. Another comment here, maybe a question from Stuart. Counter to Mark's points, are growers supposed to be disadvantaged because he's concerned someone somewhere will guess who made a sale? Why do growers have to lose so that exporters can gain? Let's see here. We mentioned that one. Marlene, which in your analysis, there's a question here. Which countries in Europe have sales reporting data like this? Is it all the EU or just some members?
No, they have an agriculture portal which gives weekly data. It's aggregated sales prices and actually volumes as well. So it's accessible by anybody, actually. It's the European community that puts it out. So that accounts for the EC.
Okay. Keep your Q&A coming, everybody. Really do appreciate it. It's very active. Okay, we answered that one.
By the way, just in terms of the sales reporting and the basis reaction, there's a very nice graph in the report that can be downloaded that actually shows that with the wheat example, how the basis reacted to the sales reporting in the US and the flash sales, actually. So, it's a very good illustration of that.
Marlene, do you? I want you to comment on Mark's point of the unintended consequences, and trying to balance the opportunity cost here. Mm-hmm. From your analysis in putting this together, I would like your perspective on that in terms of trying to balance the potential outcomes here. And I think always looking at unintended consequences are important in any sort of policy development. So I'd like your comment on that.
I mean, Mark, might have a point in the smaller commodities. Although in my experience, having traded pulses for over 20 years, I think that any of the major sales were known to any of the major players on the buying side and the sales sides very, very quickly. So I think if you had the sales reporting requirements in Canada, it might be a confirmation for some, but in general, that information on the commercial side is already well distributed. You'll be surprised how quickly that travels. Where it's not known is really on the producer side in terms of, the depth of sales and the speed of sales that are being made at any point in time. So again, I think we have a number of examples where companies have actually dealt with that question and the market absorbs it. I think there might be a small redistribution, as I mentioned earlier, of the purchase advantage, to make very quick volume purchases, say on the P side, until the sale is known. But I think overall, it's not going to make a huge difference.
Jim, get us up to speed here. A lot of times we're talking about the big crops, like corn and beans and wheat. But do those flash reports happen for even the small crops, like, say, for example, chickpeas in Montana?
No, they don't. I mean, because it's a volume. Usually you're not selling those in such a huge volume that it triggers it. Plus, I think they're more worried about like chickpeas. We don't trade that on the futures exchange as well. So we don't get that data. Okay.
So there is, at some point, there is some sort of like cutoff to this whole discussion about some of the smaller crops.
Yeah. And Shaun, I don't deal with that. I pretty much in the futures broker, so I only deal with the stuff that trades on the exchange.
No, fair enough. That all good. Marlene, if this was to be a reality and happen in Canada, is it the Grain Act review that would be the place for this, like for this call to be answered, or where does it happen? Do you know?
Well, the Grain Act review, it depends who we actually designate, who accumulates that data and who reports that data. And I must say it's very important how it's being executed. But it seems to me that the Canadian Grain Commission, for example, already does a lot of data collection. They have a lot of data from the ports. And so the suggestion was that this could be an entity that accumulates that and publishes it on a weekly basis. And obviously, they are enshrined in the Grain Act, and so it would be a good point to actually fix some of the points. So it has to be published, actually.
Okay.
And we are still within the review, pending. So there's still time to do so, actually.
The Grain Act review, that's like a never-ending story. We're like.
Well, and it's part of the issue. It takes forever to make a change in Canada, actually. And maybe we are at a point in time where we have to make some decisions and move on.
Oh, Marlene, amen.
You and we have been here for a long time, but it's nice to see change once in a while.
Yeah, I hear you. Mark, what if because of some of the concerns you've expressed, very invalid, what about a pilot project? What about trying it in a commodity and testing it?
I think that would be probably the right approach.
Go ahead.
If you were going to do it, I think you'd want to do a pilot of it and then, work with a broad group of stakeholders to say, what if we put this out? How would you use it? Kind of a show me perspective.
Yeah.
You would either get a lot of criticism or you might open some eyes up that would say, well, maybe this isn't so bad. It could go either way. But with every new measure that we've put in over the years, we did exactly that. We tested it out, see how it worked, ran it by all the different stakeholders before we actually went live. And I think that would be the right approach.
Okay. Marlene, if you could pick a commodity, which one would you pick for a pilot? Or do you want to
Well, in terms of volume and a fairly diversified market, wheat would be a good one.
Oh, you're going right after the Holy Grail right there. the one crop that doesn't like to change very much. Corey says the strategy.
But that's where the volume is right now.
Fair enough. Okay, so Corey says the strategy of keeping farmers in the dark for their own good is what the CWB did for decades. It's not the correct approach. Information is power, and farmers should have sales information as it's their product. Simple, really. Jim, there's been a lot of discussion in the U.S. about, in trying to, especially during, right after the election with Doge, there was, look at some of the reporting that USDA was doing. There was elimination of one of the cattle reports that got a lot of pushback. And actually, I believe that report's actually been added now back into the system. What would be the response, Jim, this is a very broad brush question, but what do you think the response would be if the idea was, in order to, government cutbacks at USDA, we got to, balance the budget. Let's get rid of the weekly flash reports longer term. What would be the response from the marketplace?
I think you definitely get a pushback because, I think Marlene made a mention. The reality is, when a deal gets done, when a Cargill, an ADM, a Bunge, whoever sells grain to XYZ country, that knowledge flows through to the new people who want to know, and if you have the right connections. It's amazing how quick we get information of China pricing boats here before the flash sales come. So we hear rumors of China buying this 12 million metric tons. What we're now waiting for, folks, is the confirmation that they are buying it after the fact. So if you would shut down the flash sales potentially, what you're going to do is you're going to starve half the market participants of knowledge of what's going on, in essence, because you won't know what's happening. A classic example is what happened here during the government shutdown, not on sales, but in the CFTC report. Our government collects data every Tuesday. They release it on Thursday and let you know what the trading funds are doing. Okay? We had no clue as an industry that when the bean market topped out on November 18th, the fund industry had the second largest bean position on record. The only time they've been longer in the U.S. bean commodities CBOT market, Shaun, was the drought year of 2012. We found out that knowledge about 4 weeks after the fact, and it would have been nice to know what was going on behind the scenes. And I think you'd have the same situation as if you would happen to shut down the export flow, in essence, and you weren't requiring the people to let you know what's going on in these markets, you would have a risk of essentially a portion of the deal maker, a portion of the industry, the producers of the product, flying blind. And I think there would be major pushback, would be my belief.
Okay, that's what I thought you were going to say. Daryl says maybe we should move the CGC out of outward inspection and use some of the resources to resource export sales reporting. What do you think about that, Marlene?
Well, I won't comment on the outward inspection, but
I'm trying to get you in trouble here.
If I were the Grain Commission, I would look for some very intelligent things to do in the future. So that would be certainly a good starting point in my book.
Well, that about wraps up our time here. I do appreciate all of the people that have participated in today's webinar. Fantastic turnout, some great questions and commentary. I think this is one that, I like a good spirited opinion on multiple sides of an issue. That's how we get to better resolution at the end of the day. So, Jim, thanks for joining us here today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
I love our opportunities to chat. Everybody check out agmarket.net. Jim and his team do a fantastic job. Mark, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the great work when it comes to providing those reports on what's going on in the transportation sector. Really do appreciate it. It does provide good insight into what's going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. And Marlene, I'll give you the final thought. As you look at this topic and what we heard here today, and it's a report with a lot of depth. Okay, and we were kind of able to talk about it a real 100,000 foot. What do you want to leave the audience with here today?
I think I would encourage everybody to download both reports because they're kind of complementary and it kind of sheds some light on why it is important. But I found it very interesting what Jim had to say, because he basically put up his hands in horror if none of the reports were coming out. And what it would mean, because he deals with a lot of growers in the United States, what it would mean for them, and the loss of data and information that he would fear if the reports weren't there. The flip side of that is we are flying blind as it is for the moment. And, there's a chance to at least partially offset that to some degree. And there's lots of room to shape the information that we are publishing, the frequency from where it comes, and to make it as neutral as possible. But I really believe very sternly that we have to work on every aspect of our productivity increases as we can and start piecing them together to move forward. It's no longer good enough to always stay the same. I think the time is showing that we'll have to move to go forward. So I encourage people to actually read the reports. And I think there's only one way to go forward.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. Encourage people to download those reports. The different crop commissions that make up Sask Crops, I know do have the link on their website. APAS as well, and big thank you to Sask Crops and APAS for identifying this issue and us having a discussion about it here, and supporting the opportunity to have this webinar here today. Marlene, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And big thanks to Sask Crops and APAS for sponsoring this content. We really want your feedback, your thoughts. Do you think that Canada needs weekly export sales reports like other jurisdictions like the US, the EU? Would this be a benefit to Canadian farmers in the industry, or are there some reasons not to do it? Kind of what we heard here today from our guest, Mark Hemis. We'd like your thoughts. You can do that by sending me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call or text the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.